we got word from Cactus Control that there were 75 Jap warships and 3 different task forces coming down. And our instructions were to slip through the first wave of warships and attack the transports behind them because they were coming to relieve Guadalcanal. And our skipper says, "Bull. First thing we hit, see we're going to hit." So we lined up in a row and we were going along towards the north there. And we looked up, and here was a row of warships on the horizon coming in. And so our skipper called, I was right next to him, I could hear him. He called Cactus Control and he says, "We have targets, we have ships coming in." He gave their course and their speed, and we were going to attack. And then another voice came on the radio and said, "This is Ching Chong Lee. You get your PT boats out of here, I have you on my radar. Go over, get away from here." That was Admiral Lee and a battleship South Dakota and Washington and a group of destroyers.
We received word that the Japanese battleships were approaching the area, and we knew that we expected the action on that evening. It was a beautiful night and aromatic. There were some flowers blooming on shore. I don't know what they were, but it was a very sweet aroma. And at the time, there wasn't any moon out that I remember. It was very dark.
These ships went around behind Savo, and then another group came on behind them. So our skipper called in, and he could see them, and he called in and asked Admiral Lee, says, "You have," he gave a course and speed to the ships he saw and said, "You have friends behind you." And Admiral Lee came back on the radio and says, "I have no friends." And about then, all hell broke loose.
We heard Garter Snapper Gorton say, "We have a target at 8,000 yards. And shortly after that, a light illuminated the Stars and Stripes, great big flag.
The Japanese would turn the searchlight on, and then the destroyer that turned it on would just blow up. You could watch shells going down, and some of those armor-piercing shells would go right through a ship and come out the other side. You could see them.
First I could see the fire, and then I realized as we got closer to it that it was, these were ships that were burning. And as we steamed through them, or close by the ships, I could hear them. They were Americans. And somebody was yelling, "Help, help," and somebody else say to him, "Oh, they can't stop and help us," in the middle of a battle, and we steamed right on by them. I believe that was the Preston. That was one of the 4 ships that were sunk very early in the battle. Destroyers have a short life in battles.
2 of the battleships over there started shelling north. You'd watch their 16-inch shells in the clusters of 9 sail up over the horizon and disappear, and then the ship would start burning up there. You could see ships burning and exploding. That was the transports. They just blew the hell out of them. I think word we got was they destroyed something like 30,000 Japs drowned up there, those battleships. The South Dakota had a fire on the stern. She got hit.
Ship was hit 41 times, which is a whole lot more than I was aware of at the time, and reported that there were 63 fires.
Ships were immediately on fire all over the place. They must have been, I don't know, 15 or 20 ships out there firing at each other.
Just then, everything went dark and silent, and Ed Viola said the sound-powered phones worked fine, but nothing else worked because we had no electricity. We lost all power in the middle of a battle, and we sat there very quietly. We had lights. Those emergency lights were battery controlled, so we could see each other dimly. But it was a very quiet time. I don't know how long it lasted, but it seemed like in the middle of a battle, if you haven't got any power, you feel helpless. And we did. We just sit there.
Our star shells would go up and illuminate the whole thing, and the Japs would turn searchlights on a target. And then I saw this cruiser, light cruiser, blow up. They must have hit their magazines below that turret. It was a column of fire went up like this, huge column, and in it I could see this turret just turning over and over, going up.
I was aware that there was a whole lot of damage going on in the ship's superstructure. I'd sent several teams up there, and after a while it was quiet, and I said, I'm going to go up there and see what's going on. We were getting reports of fire, and I couldn't see any fire, so I decided to go up and see what's going on. How come there's fire? I think I went up to the 07 level, and I was there weren't any fires, and I did not encounter another human being, except that I was having trouble walking. In order to climb up on the outside, there was a ladder, so I climbed. There are rungs that you could climb up, which is the only way you could get up with the inside had been shot away. Anyway, I was inside, and it occurred to me that somebody had strewn a whole lot of life jackets on the floor, on the deck, I should say. So I went, what the hell are all these life jackets doing here? So I took a peek with my flashlight, and they were not life jackets, they were bodies that I was trampling on. So I went on down. I knew there were, the inside of the superstructure had been filled with men who had been the machine gunners. The 20 millimeter people were told to get inside to take cover inside. So they were sitting around inside, and there was carnage on the inside because the mast did get hit.
We went out after the battle. It's all over with the next day, looking for survivors and see what we could find. And there was the ships all around burning. And I don't know who's sunk them, but we didn't. We went around there, and we found a sea there with, must have been hundreds of Japanese floating around in there in the water. They wouldn't let you pick them up. I won't tell you what we did there, but anyway.
I have written the story of my life, and somehow I can't get beyond. I can't get beyond World War II. I'm still in World War II. I had no idea that it would be this powerful an influence on my life. It is actually a deciding influence. It's influenced my conduct, my viewpoint. It's been a very important, the most important event of my life.
Invariably, when we ever got hit, we were in a turn, because if we got bombers coming down on us, we're trying to get off from underneath them, of course, and that ship they'd put it hard over. We'd go over about 22 degrees and be turning on an outside turn, and then you get hit while you're on that turn, and the ship is just pulsating. You can hear it. It's a pulsating feeling. You can just feel it, and then when if you get hit like we did that time, when that hit so hard, it seems like the ship stops and it's suspended, and all of a sudden it has this real sickening side shake to it. It's hard to explain, but it had this sick shaking going sideways, and it just then the ship would come down and settle, and then we'd go on with a turn, and whang, we'd hit again, and she'd start that side shake again, and And it was a terrifying experience, you know. But it just, of course, if it hit where you were, you wouldn't hear it anyhow. But that's the way it was when you. That's the way it felt to me, you know. Now everybody else could be different. But we never, in my particular case, I never worried about when the 5-inch guns went off. We knew that we were being attacked. They were shooting pretty well out. But then when the 40 millimeter started to go, you know that somebody's making a run on you. And then when the 20s went off and they're all going at the same time, then you know you're going to get it. You know, that's when you start looking for a rivet to hide under or something, anything. You know, it's hard to hide on a ship. To protect yourself, really, because especially from bombs, because they just do up the bag on you.
At Iwo Jima, it was a different terrain with the Mount Surabaki, and the beachhead was such that it just tapered off abruptly into the depths of the sea, whereas it normally, as you recall, it was kind of a long, extensive sandbar type terrain. But the problem is that I probably went in about midday on that one, and not 8 hours. And the problem was to find a place just to land the boat. To bring the boat in, because there was so much debris and wreckage and so forth and so on that it was just difficult just to find a place to land. Well, what had happened on this particular one, my first trip into the beach, I had these 36 men poised to hit the beach, and there were 2 Marine officers sitting on the engine hatch next to me. And as I went in, the 36 Marines, or actually the 30-something enlisted personnel, stormed the beach, and about the third to last man to leave the boat was carrying an awkward 30 caliber machine gun tripod mount, and in the excitement of everything or whatever, he lost his footing right in front of my lowered ramp. And now with all the troops out and my boat lightened, the waves were hitting the stern of my boat as I was trying to put in position to back away from the beach. And in so doing, as they're unloading, the waves were hitting the stern of my boat and cascading over the stern, and I was taking water into the belly of the boat. And so I was hesitating a little bit, waiting for these 2 Marine officers to get up and going out and join up with his charges. And for whatever reason, they just kept sitting there. So I realized, well, I can't sit around waiting on these guys. I could have ordered them out the boat, but that wasn't necessary. I mean, they knew what they were there for. But for whatever reason, they didn't move. Had they moved out like they should have, they could have grabbed that guy by the armpits and dragged him on out of harm's way. But I was forced to put my boat in reverse, full throttle, and in so doing, I was bucking the incoming seas, causing the water to really cascade over the stern. And by this time, the water's building up at my feet. And I still got the 2 Marine officers on board. But I did manage to back away from that young man safely. And the last I saw of him, he was scrambling, going up the beach. But in pulling away with the water, when I put it in neutral, clear the beach, when I put it in neutral, the water that had built up in the bilge had sloshed forward, dipping my bow just enough to where my motormac had not fully got the ramp all the way up. And in so doing, the water just poured in through the opening of the ramp. And in so doing, the boat just went out from under me. And so now I got my 3-man crew and myself, and I have these 2 Marine officers that I got to get them ashore some kind of way. But now the boat's gone. Well, in the heat of all this activity, a couple of my crewmen we were issued a .45 pistol for our personal protection, but we also issued Army Springfield rifles just in case something like this for hand-to-hand combat. And so a couple of them grabbed a couple of these rifles because we didn't know where we were going to be going the next half hour. And one of the guys grabbed what we call a ditty bag. It was like a sea bag, but it was something we made aboard ship for first aid gear. And So as we left my boat with water, up to our chest, it wasn't a very pretty sight. You had to be there. And as we get out of my boat and go into another boat like mine, they're tied up alongside, and they're going to try to tow me out of harm's way, and perhaps put a pump into my boat and save me for another day. But unfortunately, with the boats tied side by side like that, he couldn't make headway. And instead, we're going in circles. And now the mortars are starting to fall dangerously close. And they had an officer aboard that landing craft, and he, in effect, ordered the coxswain to cut my boat loose. And because we couldn't make headway, which they did. And that was the last I ever saw my boat. But at this point, he had to hit the beach to get these two Marines ashore. And in so doing, the two Marines stepped out, and myself and my three-man crew kind of lingered behind, hoping to hitch a ride with one of my incoming landing craft or whatever. But at that point, the ensign ordered me and my crew ashore as well. And what it was, they had like an unwritten rule that if you lost your boat, this is really directed to we coxswains, to put a fear of God in us, don't lose that boat. Because if you do, you're going to have to report to the beach master for further assignment. Now, nobody wanted to fool around with the beach master in that group, because as soon as they hit the beach, the first thing they did was turn around and start giving directions to the incoming boats. So they standing there with their back to the enemy and on the front lines, as it were, and they had a high mortality rate, as you can well imagine. So I guess that's why they would tell we coxswains and our crew that if you lose the boat, you got to report to the beach master for further assignment. So anyway, we hit the beach, and it's kind of funny as I look back on it, because we had two or three Springfield rifles, a first aid kit, and no ammunition for the guns. And of course, the two Marines, they stepped ashore, and I don't know, that was the last I saw of them. But at that point, some fellow comes walking along with the garb, suggesting he was part of the beach party, and attempting to comply with my orders. I, in effect, asked him, I told him, say, look, I lost my boat. I got to report to the beach master. Where can I find him? I don't know. They've all been wiped out. I said, oh, man, that's all I wanted to hear. So I turned to my three-man crew. I said, man, let's try and work on getting a ride, back to the ship. And what we did, we went to the water's edge and were assisting some of the arriving landing craft, placing wounded on board. And finally, one of the boats came along that was another Coast Guard vessel in the fleet. And seeing my dilemma, he invited myself and my three-man crew to come aboard. And eventually, by hitchhiking from one ship to the other, I was able to get back to the Bayfield. But I didn't get back till about midnight, because unbeknownst to us, the whole convoy had left the area because of a notification of an air raid imminent coming out of Japan. So I didn't have a ship to go to. It was out at sea somewhere. And of course, they eventually came back, and it was about midnight before I got back to the Bayfield. And at that point, I reported to my officer, what had happened. Of course, they'd given us up for lost. They didn't know what had happened to us. And so my lieutenant tells us, well, you got to go topside and report to the captain, what happened. I said, okay, fine. So I go up there, and he's up there on the bridge by himself, and leaning on the rail, watching the war in progress and everything. So I walk up to him and report that I'd lost the boat. He said, well, yeah, that's what I understand. He said, are you all right? Oh, yeah, I'm fine. What about your crew? I said, we're safe and sound. He said, well, that's all right. I just regret reporting the loss of this vital watercraft. I said, I'm very, upset about that. He said, well, don't worry about that, son. He said, we're going to probably lose some more for it. So he said, just go get some rest and be prepared to relieve other crews, and just carry on. Aye, sir. That was in February. And April, we did D-Day at Okinawa, and I was promoted to boatswain second class. So instead of winding up going in the brig, I got a promotion. And so it wasn't too bad after all.
But you can't imagine the firing that was coming at us. Copeland picked off he had a cruiser in line, the Chikuma. He started to go in after her, and I was telling you, I was in that 40 millimeter in front of the bridge and right behind our gun. Now, our guns haven't fired yet, but I was looking at that cruiser that we were bearing down on, and I saw those 3-inch or those 8-inch turrets turning toward us. That's about 10,000 yards by then, but you could see it. They're big ships. And I saw those cruisers take aim at right here in between my eyes. And we heard the noise and the smoke. And the shells came right over our heads. You can actually see the shells. They couldn't get their guns low enough to get us. We were so small. Copeland went in at 4,900 yards, turned, and we fired our 3 fish. And one of them blew his stern off of that cruiser. And we were just young enough to yelling, "Hey, you hit him, Whitey," and meaning our torpedo guys. It was like rooting we were rooting like it was a ball game, not realizing this is really combat. And we turned, and he was making he called down, as the story goes, Copeland called down to his engineering office at Trowbridge and said, "As soon as I fire Trow, give me all you got. Don't worry about the revolutions, because we're never going to use them again." Because he knew that we were going to start getting hits. Well, we made that turn. We started out, and we ran into a rain squall. We come out of the rain squall, and here comes the USS Hull, one of our destroyers, coming right by. We almost collided, and they already took about 7 hits. And when I tell you, I could see that there was no bridge left, their mast was down, the funnel was gone, and that's when we knew, boy, this is for real, that we were in a fight to the finish. And that's when we started to fire our 2 little 5-inch guns. We were in so close to those cruisers that they couldn't get their guns, their heavy armament down to hit us. And we fought like that for about 45 minutes. And our guns were going off so fast, every time that gun went off in front of us, we got that blast back to our gun. It was really mind-boggling. We started hitting the after gun. Paul Carr's gun was hitting Japanese cruisers left and right, but up. See, a 5-inch shell would bounce off a cruiser, the hull. So our 2 guns were aiming at the upper works of a ship, the gun turrets, the exposed gun turrets, and the bridge, and we were getting hits. So we were very, very. My skipper was a very fine seaman. He was chasing he was chasing salvos. If a salvo hit here, the Japanese would expect him to turn there, but he would turn, keeping with it, so the next salvo hit there, and he was doing that during the whole battle. And then finally we got hit. And we took a salvo of 6 8-inch shells back aft. And it was the same gun that I'm on, only it was back aft. And that gun and the torpedo mounts took a major hit like that. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing there, just a hole. There was no mount. Half the torpedoes were gone, and all the boys there died instantly. And that was the first hits we took. Then we fought another hour or so. We took some more hits. It was funny. We took an 8-inch shell through the bow. I never forget that. An 8-inch shell went right through. Our bow was so thin, skinned, and they were using armor-piercing shells that an armor-piercing would go through one and blow up inside. This went out and blew up on the outside, on the other side. That's the only hit we took up forward. I don't know why. Just we were very, very lucky, I guess. The ship and the bridge aft was just pulverized. We saw the Johnston about that time. The Johnston must have took 30 hits after she made her torpedo run, and it was like carnage. You couldn't tell it was a destroyer anymore. Just trying to get my thoughts. Paul Carr was the gun captain back aft on the 5-inch gun back aft. He fired 350 rounds. He had 2 rounds left down below. He was firing everything toward the end. He was firing star shells. He was firing anything that they would send up. He must have hit 2 or 3 cruises 60 times, 70 times, maybe 80 times. And then what happened, we then got a hit by a Japanese battleship shell. A 12-inch shell hit us, or a 14-inch shell hit us, on the port side, right below his gun. Opened this up, you could drive a semi through it. So we started taking water on immediately, but he lost the gas injection system at that time in his gun when those shells hit. And the gas injection system is when you put a shell into the breech plus a powder bag, when you fire, from the powder, the black powder, there's gas in the breech. You had a gas injection would suck that gas out, so the next load wouldn't if you had kind of a spark, it wouldn't blow up with that black powder. So that he and his gun crew fired 6 rounds like that, knowing that it could cook off. The 7th round they put in, it cooked off and blew the mount apart. Just blew it apart. Sammy Blue, the fuse setter, just happened just right before that explosion. He got out of his seat to just take a rest for a minute, because the shells were coming much slower then, and he was standing by the opening of the door by the mount when that thing went off, and he was blown into the water. Into the water. He had a life jacket on it, inflated automatically, and he survived. But the mount was terrible. The party that got to the mount, the 2 guys that got there right away, they looked in, and the breach was just one mass of destroyed metal, iron. There was Paul Henry Carr, our gun captain, on his knees with a projectile, a 5-inch projectile in his hand, weighing about 45 pounds, trying to put it into that mangled breech, and he was ripped open from his neck to his spleen. And the 2 guys that were there, the repair party, they saw another guy moaning, so they pulled him. They took the shell from Paul's hand, put it on the deck, and they took out that other shipmate. They went back then to get Paul, and there he was again. He lifted up that shell again to try to load against the Japanese, the enemy, get another round off, knowing his mind was saying, load, fire, but he was gone. Everything was falling out. They took the shell away from him. They took him out, and he died on the deck. Before that action, for what his gun did, Paul Henry Carr was given the Navy Cross, and I get to that later because there's 3 ships named for us after this action. But that shell stopped us. We took about 12 or 13 hits, where I told you about, back aft. And then that 12-inch shell really stopped us. We blew out a whole engine room, that we couldn't make steam anymore. Most of the guys down below were killed. And the word came to abandon ship. And that's when it really occurred to me that, wow, this is really for real. My shipmate Bud Comet, it was his job to cut down the left. We had a raft on the left side of our gun emplacement, and he said, "Jack, go down there, wait for that raft. When it goes in the water, you jump in. I'll be right down and keep it right there." I said, "Okay." So I went down that port side ladder down to the main deck. Now that was the port side is where we're leaning toward, because the water's coming in there from that battleship shell. So everybody was going off the starboard side, the high side. So I got down there. I was all by myself, and I'm waiting for that raft to be cut down. And he must have been having a tough time cutting that line. About that time, another shipmate of mine, Doherty, a ship's cook, came up, and so he and I were standing there. Meantime, shells were going off, and some of our ammunition was blowing back there, and it was horrible. And then we took another hit that really almost knocked us down. And there's still the raft's up there. So he said, we got to get in. I said, well, wait a minute. Let's just give him a few more seconds. By that time, some sailor came by, coming up from stern on the port walk, and he came by Doherty and me, and I never saw his face because I didn't get over he had nothing. He had no right arm, no right shoulder, or nothing. Just a gap. And I just stared at that because I never saw anything like that in my life. And so I never got to his face. When I was interrogated later on, they wanted to know if I knew who that was. I just, to this day, I don't know who that was. So he was walking toward the bow, and then the ship lurched. Took on more tons of water going in there. So Doherty and I, we jumped in then, and we only had maybe 6 feet. And we jumped in the water. The raft was still there. I don't know what happened. God knows, I didn't know what happened to Bud, Could be something happened. Well, we got in the water and we started, it was all, easy, there was fuel from our bunker and on fire, so we had to push that away, and we had K-Pox on. And the water was sucking us into that hole, so we really had to go fast because we knew enough. We had to get away from a ship when it was going down, or you wouldn't get sucked under. So we made our way as quick as we could and get around that water and fire. And as I got toward the back end of the ship, I looked up and I could see Carr's gun. I said to Doherty, "Look at that gun! My God, it was just blasted away. Look, there's no torpedoes left. Torpedo tubes are not even there." When we got around the end of the ship, we had a name on the transom, Samuel B. Roberts. There was the depth charges rack. They were already under the water there, and we saw a bunch of guys out there from the starboard side. And those are the guys that were going off the other side, and we made toward those group of guys, and we tied up with them. There was about 50 of us with that group. We had one raft, one net. No, we had a raft. Bud came along about 15 minutes later with the raft, and before she went down, there was 3 guys in that hole, and they were sitting on the stairwells. They were still above the water. And they saw Bud come by there, and they were yelling for help. So he went in and got those 3 guys. They got on that raft, and Bud got around. So he finally got the raft down. So he brought those 3 guys out of the hole, and they came and they tied up. So we had a net and a raft, and we had all the wounded guys inside the net and inside the raft, and the rest of us that weren't that bad wounded tied on the outside. And now the captain's group was another bunch of guys where we could see them. And then someone said, "There she goes." And we looked over, and the ship was going down by the stern port, and she put up her bow and just stayed there for a moment, and then slid under. And there wasn't a dry eye in the face. It was like losing your home, And then after that, our troubles began, being in the water. Now we're in the water, we watched the Samuel B. Roberts sink, and we figured, well, we'll be picked up. But we don't realize that the Gambier Bay went down also, the aircraft carrier. Those Jeep carriers carried about 1,000 men, 950 to 1,050, something like that. Well, we're going to get picked up, Not so. About 15 minutes after the Roberts went down, somebody yelled, "Look what's coming." And then we looked around, and there was a Japanese heavy cruiser heading right for us. All you could see is their bow with the water coming. Oh my God, they're going to run right over us. Well, they turned, made a little starboard turn about 200-300 yards before, and they were about maybe a football field away from us when they came by, and the Japanese captain of that ship was on the port wing, and there he was standing like this saluting us. And some guy on the bow with the moving picture camera was snapping us in the water. And that ship went by doing at least 35 knots, maybe 30 knots, and so that wake, we almost drowned from the wake. We went up, you know, almost higher than this room, you know. And all of a sudden, within the next hour, there was just quiet. Nothing there. We couldn't even see the captain's group anymore. We were all by ourselves. The plane came over and dipped its wings at us, and we figured, oh, we'll get picked up. But that didn't happen. Now, Admiral Sprague, our admiral, sent back the Dennis and the Raymond and the John C. Butler to pick up survivors from the Gambia Bay, the carrier that went down. And they picked up about 400 or 500 guys there. Also, a little while later in the afternoon, the St. Lo, one of our other aircraft carriers, about 4 hours after our battle, were hit by a kamikaze. First kamikaze of World War II. And she exploded. So they were picking up guys from these two survivors of these two ships. We spent the first night in the water together. No supplies, no food, no water, no medical supplies. And the next morning, somebody spotted sharks. And there they were. You've seen the movies, the fins, you know. Oh my God. And they started attacking us. And so the guys in the water, like me, we had to turn around and kick our feet. Well, we all had our shoes on because we were told to leave your shoes on when you abandon ship. Well, if you ever try to lift your feet out of the water with your shoes on to splash, it's very hard. Well, about an hour later, took one of the boys on the other side of the raft, and we had to cut him loose. And they went away while, you know, the sharks came to that poor guy and sort of made a little reprieve for us. Well, this went on all day. And then finally, at dusk, we didn't see him anymore. So, but we could hear surf. We were floating toward Samar. See, we were sunk off the island of Samar, which is right above Leyte. And we could hear surf. So we said, well, so we tried to start going in. But, you know, it's very hard to do that with your hand, you know. Guys are hurt, guys are moaning. We had one guy that was burnt from head to foot inside our net. He was a water tender down below, and when the steam pipes burst, he gets burnt in the live steam, asbestos all over him. It was a terrible night. We just couldn't pull anymore, but we could hear that surf. We knew we were close to the beaches, but this was still a Japanese-held island, you know. So we didn't know what the hell. But in the meantime, in the middle of the night, the tide changed and pulled us all the way back out. So now it's the next day, and here come the sharks again. And they attacked us. They were just all around us all day long. And about middle afternoon, I'm dozing. I'm tied on. You must remember, I'm tied on to the net, but I'm in water up to here the whole time. The only thing that kept me from swallowing a lot of water, salt water, was if you doze, your cape pocket is right here, so you get a little water into your mouth. But I was dozing, and all of a sudden I felt something on my thigh, under the water, like this, pressing at me. And I looked down, and there was a shark, 15-feet tiger shark, huge. And I just, and then he gave me another nudge. And I'm just saying, God, please. And he left. And about 10 seconds later, 2 men down from me. A yell, a cry, and the shark took that man's leg right off. And I keep today, even 60 years, almost 60 years later, I say, why him and not me, you know? So this went on all day long again. And we just didn't have, didn't know what to do. Getting a little testy, guys getting a little testy. Guys that drank too much salt water get nuts, hallucinations. Well, I'm going down to get my chow, and the guy actually tried to drown himself. He's going down below to have morning chow, or I'm going down to get some water. This was going on all afternoon, and the nighttime was terrible. I'm leaving, and 4 or 5 guys actually left the raft and the net and just swam away. Never heard from them again. Couldn't stop them. The next morning, it was about 10 o'clock. Someone sees a mast. There's a ship. And we look up. Well, maybe it's Japanese. Well, we can't last another night. We wouldn't last another night. Got a little closer. By God, it was a patrol craft, but we still couldn't tell if it was American until it got a little closer and went by us, and there was the American flag by the stack. And boy, we all started yelling. He came in closer and closer, and we all were covered with diesel fuel, which really saved us from getting sunburned terribly. And he circling us, and it's a little old patrol craft, maybe, 105 feet long, something like that. And they had their one little 40 millimeter and 50 caliber machine guns pointing right at us. Thought we were Japanese, I guess. The captain has a megaphone, and he yells out, "Who are you?" And we yell, "Samuel B. Roberts." And he comes in a little closer yet, and we're cursing every curse word there is. And he says, "Who won the World Series?" Well, that particular year, 1944, the World Series was just over, just a couple of weeks before the battle. St. Louis Cardinals won. And we yelled back at him, "St. Louis Cardinals." And boy, you could hear the bells ringing, stop, complete stop. And the crew was throwing in life preservers and stuff. And that's how we got picked up. And we got against the ship. And the young man, I told you, it was a water tender. He was burnt. He was in that net the whole time, and he never stopped moaning. If you can imagine, a man was charred. And he lived all that time and we got him. We used to send down a stretcher, some of the guys put this fella Osborne, in the stretcher, and they pulled him up. By the time I got up on the deck, he died. So he lasted the whole time in the water. And the minute he was put on that deck, he passed away.